There's a moment in every love story when everything still feels unbreakable, when the future looks certain, when loyalty feels permanent. For Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban, that moment came with flashing cameras, handwritten letters, and promises whispered between continents. But for Russell Crowe, that moment came with something else. A quiet sense of unease. He had seen enough in life to know that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings carry invisible cracks. And from the very start, he was watching closely. Because years later, when the custody papers were signed and the silence between Nicole and Keith became permanent, Russell wasn't surprised. He had been watching the truth unfold for nearly 2 decades. January 2005. Los Angeles glittered under the weight of its own mythology. Inside the Day LA Gala, the most powerful names in entertainment filled the room. But for Russell, the night wasn't about the crowd. It was about Nicole. He had known her long enough to recognize the difference between strength and recovery. On the surface, she was untouchable, elegant, composed, already a global icon. But privately, she was still rebuilding herself. Her divorce from Tom Cruise had left scars deeper than the public ever understood. She carried herself with grace, but there was caution in her eyes now, a quiet protectiveness around her heart. Then Keith walked in. He wasn't the global superstar he would later become. He was still rising, still proving himself, still carrying his own private battles. Russell noticed the moment Nicole noticed him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was something quieter. Recognition, hope, possibility. But what struck Russell wasn't the spark. It was the uncertainty behind it. Nicole wasn't falling for power. She was falling for something that felt safe, something familiar, something that reminded her of home. And that made Russell pay attention, because safety can sometimes be an illusion. After that night, nothing happened. No calls, no messages, no grand romantic gestures. Nicole waited. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. For someone who had spent her life surrounded by attention, the silence was disorienting. She questioned herself, wondered if she had imagined the connection entirely. Russell watched quietly from a distance. He knew Nicole's heart better than most people. He knew she didn't fall easily, and when she did, she fell completely. Then finally, 4 months later, Keith called. That call changed everything. Their first real day together wasn't staged. It wasn't polished. It was simple. A motorcycle ride through open air. No scripts, no cameras, just 2 people discovering each other without the world watching. Nicole would later say she knew, even then, that her life had shifted. Russell hoped she was right, but hope and certainty are not the same thing. By June 2006, their relationship had accelerated into something that felt unstoppable. They married in Sydney, surrounded by friends, family, and a country that embraced them as its own royal couple. The ceremony was perfect, every detail carefully chosen, every expression filled with promise. They wrote letters to each other constantly. Even when apart for only days, they stayed connected through words. It created a sense of emotional closeness that seemed unbreakable. To the outside world, it looked like the kind of love that survives anything. But Russell noticed something others didn't. Nicole wasn't just in love. She was invested, completely. And when one person gives everything, the balance becomes fragile. Still, no one could have predicted how quickly that balance would be tested. Marriage is supposed to begin with stability. Instead, theirs began with crisis. Just 4 months after their wedding, Keith relapsed. Addiction doesn't ask permission. It doesn't respect timing. It doesn't care about promises or ceremonies. It simply returns. Nicole faced a choice most people never have to make so soon. She could protect herself, or she could fight for the man she loved. She chose to fight. She stepped away from her career, walked away from momentum, put everything on hold to stand beside him during recovery. Russell watched her do it. He saw the exhaustion, the determination, the quiet fear she never showed publicly. Keith survived that period. Their marriage survived it too. But survival changes people. It creates debts that can never be fully repaid. And Russell knew that kind of emotional imbalance doesn't disappear. It waits. From the outside, their life seemed to stabilize. They built a family, welcomed their daughters, created routines that looked grounded and real. Nicole returned to her career. Keith's success exploded across the music world. They appeared stronger than ever. But success often hides distance. Keith spent most of his life on the road, touring, performing, living inside a schedule that left little room for stillness. Nicole built her life between film sets and family. Their worlds overlapped, but they weren't always shared. Russell noticed the shift long before anyone else did. The nightly letters became less frequent. The long conversations became shorter. The emotional closeness that once came effortlessly now required effort. Distance doesn't destroy love overnight. It erodes it quietly, and erosion is harder to see. In 2018, something happened that forced reality into the open. Nicole discovered messages on Keith's phone. Not innocent messages, not harmless conversations, messages that carried intention, conversations that crossed boundaries. The discovery wasn't explosive. It wasn't dramatic. It was devastating in a quieter way, because betrayal doesn't just break trust. It rewrites memories. It forces you to question moments you once believed were real. Nicole confronted him, not with anger, but with clarity. She wanted truth. Russell was one of the first people she called afterward. He had suspected cracks, but now there was proof. Keith apologized, promised change, promised transparency, and Nicole made the hardest decision someone in her position can make. She chose forgiveness, because love doesn't disappear instantly. It lingers. It hopes. But forgiveness doesn't erase damage. It only delays its consequences. For a while, it seemed like things might recover. They appeared together publicly, smiled for cameras, spoke about each other with affection. But appearances don't always reflect reality. Privately, the trust had shifted. Nicole became more guarded, more observant. Keith became quieter, more distant. Russell remained close to Nicole throughout it all, not interfering, not judging, just present. He understood something most people didn't. Love can survive betrayal, but it never returns to its original form. Something always changes. By 2024, the emotional distance had grown impossible to ignore. They were still married, but no longer connected in the way they once were. Their conversations became practical instead of emotional. Their lives became parallel instead of shared. Nicole had spent nearly 2 decades holding the relationship together through loyalty, sacrifice, and belief. But even the strongest people have limits. Russell heard it in her voice before anything became public. Not anger, not sadness, acceptance. She wasn't fighting anymore. She was letting go. In 2025, the separation became real. There was no dramatic announcement, no public spectacle, just paperwork, legal filings, final decisions made behind closed doors. By January 2026, the marriage was officially over. 19 years, gone. The custody agreement revealed what Russell had understood for years. Nicole had been the constant presence, the stable center, the one who stayed. Keith had lived a life defined by movement. The legal outcome didn't create that reality. It reflected it. For Nicole, the decision wasn't about punishment. It was about peace. She wasn't trying to win. She was trying to be free. Through everything, Russell remained exactly what he had always been. Present, loyal, protective. Their friendship wasn't built on convenience. It was built on history, on trust that had survived decades of change. He didn't step forward publicly for attention. He stepped forward because silence sometimes protects the wrong story. He knew Nicole's strength. He knew her sacrifices. He knew the truth behind the image, and he refused to let that truth disappear. But loyalty carries its own cost. His unwavering support created tension in his own personal life. Not because there was anything romantic, but because emotional loyalty requires time, energy, and presence. Still, he never stepped back. Because some friendships don't fade when life becomes complicated. They become stronger. For Keith, the silence that followed the divorce was its own kind of reckoning. There were no dramatic interviews, no public defenses, just absence. Sometimes the loudest regret is silence. He had once been given a second chance, a chance built on forgiveness, patience, and belief. But second chances are not permanent guarantees. They are opportunities, and opportunities can be lost. Russell had witnessed the entire story, the spark, the hope, the crisis, the survival, the betrayal, and, finally, the ending. He had seen Nicole give everything she had to preserve something she believed in. He had seen her fight for love longer than most people would have, and in the end, he saw her choose herself, not out of bitterness, but out of strength. Because sometimes strength isn't staying. Sometimes strength is knowing when to walk away. The fairy tale didn't survive, but something else did. Nicole's resilience, Russell's loyalty, and the quiet truth that love, no matter how powerful, cannot survive without trust. In the end, Russell didn't expose anything that wasn't already written in the years themselves. He simply refused to let the real story disappear behind the illusion, because he had been there from the beginning, watching, understanding, knowing, and when it was over, he remained exactly what he had always been, a witness to the truth,